If you build custom apps or automations, this is a topic that is often overlooked, but it is genuinely 50% of the battle. It is system design and high-level overview planning. If I had spent more time getting good at this over the past 6 years, then I would have saved myself literally hundreds of hours of pain and wasted code. What I'm going to show you is how I go from notes from a conversation and this essential sketch overview to a highly detailed diagram of the entire flow of a RAG system, and then this detailed 7-stage plan with additional notes. So this is before I've jumped in and wrote any code or used any custom automation software. I'll show you what I document and why, how I decide on what tech to use, at what point I start having little discussions with Claude and OpenAI to improve the plan, and then I'll show you the final output that has got me confident that I can build something pretty cool within just a couple of weeks. This could be really useful for any junior to mid-level engineers, or anyone getting into building custom solutions, or anyone that's getting into vibe coding, which seems to be a thing at the moment. I've committed to filming one of these videos every week, and this is something that I'm going through right now. So I'm going to dive straight into the document that I've created for myself planning out this project. This is for a friend that's a consultant. They work with a specific niche type of business, trying to help them grow. Everything that I got here, I got out of an automation audit that I carried out with him, where we went through everything that he does and tries to figure out where could AI and automation help through their flows. So I've set the context here. The client is a consultant to help the niche business grow. They do this through a mixture of 1 hour per week consultation, preparation for this meeting, into the consultant creating reports for the client's business, and then analyzing changes progress over the past week. The consultant also answers questions for the client through Slack, and then they also provide training content that has lots of advice on how to overcome specific issues. Clients are usually too busy to go through all of the content by themselves, but it does answer most of the questions for the client. Sometimes the consultant will directly link to a bit of content for the client to read, but very often if they ask a question, they'll use the knowledge in their head and then the content to try and answer specifically based on their context. So I've set out all of this context. It's useful for me to see, but the main reason why this is really important is I'm going to take all of this and my rough idea of a plan to AI and have a discussion with it, and having the context is incredibly important. We'll move on to setting the stage of what we're actually going to build. First of all, I've written out the problem that we are trying to solve. It is answering client questions is taking at least 1 hour per day for the consultant. Many of these questions have already been asked by other people, or the answers can be found in the documentation and training content. So the goal is to get from 1 hour per day down to 1 hour per week. If you can go from 1 hour per day to 1 hour per week, it allows him to take on 4 extra clients, which directly increases revenue and his take-home pay. If you can reduce the amount of time somebody takes on work, that's good. If you can reduce costs, even better. But if you can directly increase revenue, that's ideal, that we want from any technology system. Now, before I've done any more research, I had a rough idea of what we're going to build here. We knew that we wanted to have an AI-powered RAG system that connects into Slack, that will be able to attempt to answer client questions based on context about the client, previous conversations with the client, all of the training content, and then questions and answers from other clients. The system will then suggest an answer along with this context to the consultant so they can tweak it and answer the client's question much quicker. And I knew that I was going to use N8N if and where possible, as it's quicker to develop, but custom code if it's too complex or any sections that are required. I straight away came in and drew a diagram of this rough idea of a system. And then straight off the bat, what do I have in my head that's going to be difficult here? What are the sort of questions that I know I'm going to need to answer before I've even done more research? So getting messages and conversations out of Slack could be difficult. Knowing what messages relate to each other, as it's unlikely that there's just a question and a reply. So that's going to be difficult to try and figure out how to get those messages together. Knowing what information to prioritize could be quite difficult. How to chunk the training content, and then providing a response in the tone that's similar to the consultant, that could also be quite difficult. And again, at this point, I started thinking of questions that I need from the consultant, who's the friend that I'm building this for. So this is before I've went and done anything else. This is me just setting the stage. Now, what I'm going to do is take all of this information into AI to have a discussion, which I'll show you in a second. I just want to quickly show you the initial basic diagram that I made here. We know that client's going to ask a question. We know we're going to want to save that message. We know AI is going to have to get relevant information to attempt to answer the question. The consultant's going to have to check, modify it, and then we're going to reply to the client. And I know that we've got 4 different data sources in the head already. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to fit at this point, but I know we're going to need context about the client's previous conversations. We're going to need all the training documents, and we're going to need the other client conversations. Before going any further, I'd like to cover what RAG is. If you're advanced with using AI systems and you know what RAG is already, then you can skip over this. So RAG is just getting additional information that you can use for AI. AI is trained on most of the web, but it doesn't have your specific information. So a super simple version of RAG is a client asks a question and they include the client ID. You pass that question off to the LLM, the OpenAI Claude, try and answer the question. But before you do that, you also go and get information about the client, the context about them, and also pass that into the LLM. So this is how it looks in a diagram form, but how does that actually look when it gets into the LLM? Here I've got OpenAI's playground just because it's nice and simple to see. So we've got the system message here. I've kept this nice and simple just to demonstrate. The role, expert answering the client question. The task is to try and answer the client question using the context about them. Make it really specific to who's asking the question. And the response format is we're just going directly with an answer to the question. None of the fluff that LLMs tried to add. And then we've got the specifics. So this is in the automation or in code where we'd actually add the things that are different per question per client. So we've got the question, how can we improve our property listing to attract more potential buyers? And then the client context, this is the bit from RAG that we've went and got from a database that fills in here. So we've said that this is Bright House Estate, family-run agency, personalized service, focus on residential property. So we answer this, AI to give us an answer. It gives us an answer that's very specific to this client. So that's how we add extra data to AI and LLM. If we come in and look at a more advanced example, this is how people normally use RAG, which is adding information over documents. In this case, a client asks a question, we're going to again pass that question straight through to the LLM. But we want to get parts of our company documents that are useful for this question. How do we do that? Before we go to AI, we take this question and we search our database for bits that are similar. We've got these documents, we're going to chunk them into smaller sections so it's easier to feed data into the LLM, easier to find small sections. And we're going to do this thing called semantic search. And it runs over vectors, which is a bit complex to explain, but not that important here. All that matters is we've got all of the text from the document saved, and we've also got this fancy embedding thing that is easy to run search over. We've got our question, and it will find chunks that are similar to the question, and then we'll feed all of that into AI. We come over and look at how this would also look. We've got OpenAI Playground again. Now this one's a little bit more advanced. Again, this is the exact same for everyone else. So I want the AI to be a management consultant, trying to specialize in digital transformation. Response format, I want it to answer the question and then also include what documents they reference. So this is the bit that would be different for each client question. Is the question, we're planning a new digital marketing campaign to expand our brand awareness on a moderate budget. Which social media platforms and ad formats are likely to yield the highest ROI for our target demographic? Now our semantic search would have returned these three chunks. These are parts of documents that could be useful here. It's not using AI, it's just words that are similar. And if we run this one, we get given a question. And the important thing here is despite the fact we've got three chunks that are all useful, the AI is only returned two references because this one in the middle, email marketing effectiveness report, is not useful for a question. So AI has essentially ignored that, tried to answer the question using just these two chunks. That's a bit more of an advanced situation of RAG of how we add additional context. Now, if you look here, this RAG section fetching data is happening before we go to the AI. In more modern systems using tools, what we can actually do is get the AI to connect to the database directly through a tool, and the AI itself will decide, do I need to go and fetch context? And it will pass what it needs to the search engine to get those sections. This is a bit more advanced, but can be a lot more powerful. Come back in to look at the document. We've set the stage. This is all before we've done any research. First of all, what are we trying to get to? What we're trying to get to is a more advanced diagram of how I'm going to build the system, which I'll show you later, and then a plan or overview of what I'm going to build and then when. Whilst we're doing this, what I'm trying to find is what questions do I not have the answer to. These are here, and then as I'm going through the research, I'm trying to find more of these questions and then answer them so I've got a good idea of what I'm trying to build. This is the point that I start talking to AI and start doing my research. What I've done is took all this initial sections and came into OpenAI with O1. I then moved to O3, but started with O1, provided it all of the context of what I'm trying to build, and essentially asked it to try and help me formulate a plan of how I could build this. Now, it comes back with a lot here. What I'm looking for is bits that I might have missed. Like what's not in my head? What do I need to research more here? AI is a really, really good thinking partner for going against. This is why working in teams is really useful. AI can be that extra team member essentially. So it sets out problem goal, why it matters, the sort of stuff that I provided for it. Let's come here
And then major challenges and considerations. Again, these are some that I've been looking at. Fine-tune a model, support effect. Tone. Okay, I'm going to need to do a bit more research on connectors between N8N and Slack, and then just generally speaking how Slack's interface works, API. Start with a proof of concept, so it recommends starting with training documents, small portion of Q&A. At this point, I'm starting to think the bit that I'm just not sure on is chunking up the conversations. I know how to deal with documents, but conversations and getting information from that's a bit more complex. So I started asking it, give me some ideas on ways this could be done. The best way to do this, what field should I use? How should a database look? What exactly should I pass to AI at the end? And it starts going in quite some detail. We're going to want to save message text about each message. Okay, we're going to want to link them to conversations. Okay, so despite the fact we've got one chat with our client, we're probably going to want to link some messages together into smaller conversations that are going to be useful, because you don't want to return the entire channel. We're going to have some sort of relevance filtering, how to split and chuck the conversations. Okay, it's starting to give me some good ideas here. What to return for the AI to generate, relevant excerpts, source metadata, or summary of the chunk. Oh, that's an interesting concept. If we've got 5 messages, we might want to summarize them as we go. What vector database to use. It even starts recommending technology to use, Pinecone, question consideration, privacy and data. This is something that wasn't really on my mind from the very beginning, but now that I'm starting to think about, okay, yes, if we're using messages from other people, despite the fact we're not providing that straight to the client, we're probably going to want to remove some data there. Okay, this is good. I know the priority that we need business context, Slack, useful parts of training document. I've said let's ignore the training documentation for now because I know how to deal with that problem already. And I've started asking a bit more in-depth questions. There's one going on chat. They're going to last at least 6 months. Really split into sets, so it's all in one big channel. This might actually not be true, but at this point I wanted to deal with the case of if it is. Need to handle it. Can store each message, no problem. I think it would likely be not good to just return single messages at a time. As we'd seen, RAG search runs semantic search over things. Now, if we just get a single message, we're missing the answer, we're missing the context as well. It starts creating really more into depth at table level. Now, this can be good even at a high level to start seeing how it's thinking. Seeing some sort of ideas of implementation can start you thinking about, okay, how could this go? Before I've started diving into code and solving the problem, seeing ways that this could be solved. Quite often when I'm doing normal code, I'll just start coding. But this is really useful to take a step back and can get this a much quicker. This took seconds rather than me coding all of this out and then going, okay, that's not the right way to structure this. So that's reckon a message table, a Q&A table. This is not something I was thinking about. This is a good idea. How to retrieve useful information. Okay, now I was wondering, what do I do exactly when a message comes in? We're going to want to capture it. We're going to identify what conversation or topic, or however we want to chunk them together. What is it part of? Okay, so this is all good ideas. Now at this point, I actually done something that's not good. I started really diving deep on a single section and I jumped in too much. I should have took a step back. What are the parts that are useful here? What is really going to be good? What do I really need to think about here? Rather than going deep into, okay, how do I code this and what are the tables that I need? What I did get to at the end of this conversation was getting it to give me a prompt that I could feed into Cursor AI to build out this system without the documentation stuff, but at a high level. Now this is, again, too in the weeds, but it did give me some nice context here. I need to remember about initial loading of chat conversations before we even receive our first message. I need to deal with an endpoint for messages received. It gives me an idea for a data model for the database, and then some extra data here. Again, this was too in the weeds, but what I did do is took a step back, went for a little walk, and came back and went into Claude with this. Now this is a really useful tool that you can use, is either going to a separate AI or even just starting a new chat conversation so it doesn't have all of your previous conversation. And I provided the context again and then provided it the exact prompt that it gave me, copied it in here, and asked it to try and scrutinize what was being implemented there and then what might be missed. And this was really, really useful. Got a bit more of a conversation going, got a bit more context. It noticed things that were good, but noticed the things that were missing. Like we're not mentioning tone matching or training content integration, which I knew, but the tone matching, that would be useful and something I need to remember about. And then I had a little back and forth using Claude. Claude's actually tends to be a little bit better for things that are code implemented, so that was another mistake I made, is in OpenAI, getting to the point of writing code. That's the point that I probably should have came to Claude. For me personally, I much prefer the Sonnet system than OpenAI for writing code. A little conversation back and forth. And again, a little bit too in the weeds, but it got to some more things that I wasn't previously thinking about and a further implementation. So especially around this, how do I chunk up text messages together? It started writing some code for this. Again, the code was really in depth. I then got it to, okay, take a step back and at a high level, what are the functions and things that I would need to do here? So determining topic membership of what conversation a message is part of, like how do they link together? And now that I'm looking at this, I'm starting thinking, okay, for this part here, init-in is probably not going to cut it. It's going to be too complex to try and do this in init-in. I'm probably going to need some custom code or custom API at some point. So that's the useful part that I got here. Throughout this research with both the conversations, I started getting questions that I really need to get answers to. Like how to store the Slack conversation for the RAG system. Exactly what do we get back from Slack? Neither of those provided it. But I then went and done further research, looking into the actual Slack API, seeing, okay, what is the rough data here? I then also went into init-in as a connector to Slack and saying, what is it going to give me back? And started thinking, okay, I don't need to know the exact implementation. This is all going to come when I actually start developing, but can I get roughly what I'm looking for here? A big question I had is, can Slack connect directly to one-to-one conversations? So I came into Perplexity, another AI tool, and asked it the question on this. And it answered, yes, it can. Give me some implementation on how this can be done. And I went back and looked at the docs and double checked that that's correct. I'm starting to think about how do I chunk and store the training documentation. That's, again, a fairly solved problem. And then how to structure different responses from the vector database to accurately get all information required. These are the questions as I'm coming through. So with the conversation with AI, looking at the Slack notes was the main research that I'd done. I'd started to decide, okay, what database am I going to use? I want to use Supabase because it integrates well with init-in and it's really easy to implement in TypeScript, which is what I generally develop in. And then am I using custom code or init-in? At this point, before I start doing any development, I'm going to start with init-in, especially for documentation and testing. But I have an expectation at least at some point I'm going to have to exit to proper code either for the entire thing or even just for a small section. Started getting all these questions. I was able to start formulating a plan of how I'm going to do this and getting a more in-depth diagram. For each stage of this plan, I then came in and wrote some more notes on what I'm going to do at this stage. So in the first stage, answering questions based on documents, going to create a RAG database that stores all the content, loads that in, and then can answer questions based on it. I'm going to add additional details about each document, like a summary. This is things that came up from AI and that I also know from my own context. I'm going to decide how large chunk sizes should be, and I'm going to figure out a nice prompt for answering the questions that includes the references so that the consultant can see what's going on there. Then when I move on to introducing context about the client, I'm going to start with this really nice and basic coming from a database. This is why we're using Supabase as a database, because it handles these vector things that we need for AI RAG, but it can also retrieve basic information or normal structured data. And receive that based on the client's name or ID. And then I'm going to refine it to sound a bit more like the consultant, start with prompt rules, about how to sound, format, etc. And then I'll start introducing some examples of past answers the consultant has given to try and get it to sound more like that. I'll then move on to the basic connecting with Slack, using Slack messages as a question system, just provide an answer as a result of the system. Again, I know up until this point, I think I'm pretty good to use init-in, and I'm going to try hard to use that because I can iterate really quite quickly. When a question does come in, I know I'm going to store it in the database, and ideally I want to get the answer to the question inside Slack, but that might be a little bit more complex, so I might leave that till later in the stage. When I get to this point, I'll try and give that a go. If it's going to take more than a few hours, I'll leave that till later because it's not as critical to the rest of this. I'm then going to introduce context from previous messages. This is the point that we're going to figure out how to get them together to topics conversation. I suspect that I might need an API here. And I'm going to use the RAG system, play with chunk sizes and prompts. Then I'll introduce context from messages with others. A lot of the problem here is going to be solved when you're dealing with conversations with the same client. But at this stage, I need to remember to strip out personal detail. And then 7, we'll go for more advanced connection to Slack, get the suggested answer to appear in Slack. And looking through the Slack documentation, I've seen that they've got an AI part. That might be useful. But up until this point, I'm ignoring that. Now that I've got a plan together, this is the stage where I can create a more detailed diagram for what I'm building. Our initial diagram didn't really know what was going on. We just knew question coming in, question coming out. But in this final stage, I've came into Figma Jam. This is really nice and easy for making software and connecting things together. I've started looking at more parts of this. Where a document is added and updated, it's going to stay in training documents. So I know that's an entire flow that I need to build up. We then have a flow of a message coming in. So we find the message conversation that it's part of and update again in the database. And then the last bit is requesting an answer to a question. Now, ideally, when a question comes in, we can also move to this stage after we've saved it. But it's useful in my head to think about these as actually two separate flows, so we can get an answer to a message separate to the message coming in. This is going to be useful for testing as well. And when we want to answer a question, what I'm going to do is get that message and the conversation it's part of, possibly the 5 or 10 messages before it as well. I'm going to get the information about the client. This is all going to happen before we get to AI. Then I'm going to come into the AI stage and I'm going to connect it up with tooling for getting these extra bits of data so that AI itself can decide, do I need to get conversation chunks? Do I need to get other people's conversations? Do I need the training documents? Because what we might realize is that if I can answer this based on training docs and the messages here, I don't need to go and fetch more conversations, and I don't need to fetch conversations from other clients. So AI might get to a stage that says, okay, I can answer based on just training docs. That's enough. It will suggest an answer. Now that I've got this diagram and this plan, I'm in a much better position to build this out really quickly. If I just jumped straight in, I can see loads of points along the way that I would have wasted hours deep diving when now I can see they aren't really that important. Because I'm going to start using automation software, this plan and this diagram is enough for me. But if I was to do all of this in custom code, what I would do is take this plan and the diagram, feed it into Claude, and then start getting it to formulate a plan in code, block by block, building out each section one by one so that I can test each part as it goes. But at the moment, this is enough for me. I'm going to crack on with this.
I just love chatting about tech, and at the moment I'm learning a ton about AI and automation solutions. I'm documenting what I learn and the processes I go through. If you find this useful or you just want to chat about tech, then find one of the links below and reach out. Always happy to chat.